Okay, now we're going to talk about the max function. So let's go ahead and we'll put our little comment over here. So max function. And it's basically the same kind of format where you can just, go ahead and you can echo out if you want to get the value of it. We're going to go max, and then we'll do the numbers array. Okay, and let's go ahead and put some breaks in here. All right, and then we can also, while we're at it, go ahead and do the strings array as well. And we'll change that to strings. Okay, and also let's go ahead here, copy this, and we're going to paste those at the end so that we have an extra space in between on the browser. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save this, and we'll do a test, and we'll see what happens. Okay, so the max on the numbers array is 8, and the max on strings is fish. Interesting. Let's explain what's going on there. Let's go back to Dreamweaver really quick. Okay, and let's look at these arrays. So first let's look at the numbers, and we'll look at that up here. Okay, so this one should be pretty evident. What max does, the max function does, as we described earlier, is that it actually will take the highest value, and it goes in a certain pecking order, and you can go back to the previous slide if you want to look at that pecking order again, but this is the highest integer that's in here, and so we've got a bunch of other ones, but they're all lower than that. That's pretty obvious. Okay, so for strings, let's look at strings. Well, not only does the max function look at numbers, but it also will look at strings. If it is comparing a string to an actual integer or float, it's going to give the string basically not exactly the value of 0, but essentially it gives it the value of 0. Because it doesn't know what else to do, unless of course there is a number that is leading the string, and then it might actually count it. Okay, so, but for all intents and purposes, if we look at strings, most likely it's going to end up putting the value of a string at close to 0. Now the reason I say close to 0 is that if we actually put a 0 in this array, then you would see that the string of dog would actually return at a higher level than the actual 0 integer. However, any negative number, any negative integer or float would actually still return a higher value yet than a string. So it's kind of in this weird limbo space. But then once it goes within the string, sort of the string area, it goes by an alphabetical ordering. So fish is the highest because F comes the latest in the alphabet compared to B, C, and D. Alright, so, but what happens if we put other things inside of this strings array? I mean, I know it's called strings, but let's just do some testing. So come over here at the end of fish, after the quotation marks, and we'll do a comma, and we'll add the integer 0, and we'll see which one evaluates to be the maximum value. Which one is the higher value? Is it 0 or is it fish? Let's do a save. Because, logically you would think, oh, okay, well, a string would be 0, right? Well, let's just check. Okay, so we're going to go to Firefox and refresh it, and right here you can see that it says fish. So fish is a higher value in terms of, the way that this function works. It's a higher value than the actual integer 0. So let's go back to Dreamweaver. Let's do another test. Let's see if a tiny, it's a comma, if a really tiny fraction will equate or evaluate to be smaller. So we'll go 0.0001. Okay, let's save that and let's do another test in Firefox. Okay, so that's interesting, right? So this tiny decimal evaluates to actually be higher than fish. So that's kind of an interesting concept, all right, that we have 0 and then a string evaluates to be higher, and I guess one of the ways you could think of that is that the string is actually something, okay, but it's not really a number. Okay, so it's something, but it's still smaller than even the smallest of fractional numbers. Oh, so I should say fractional positive numbers. Okay, so let's go back to Dreamweaver, and I want to just show you something also so that you're not flipped out by it if you ever see it. So right now we've got 4 decimal places. All right, if we add one more, now we have 5 decimal places. Let's save that and let's test it and see what happens. Okay, and it gives you this weirdo looking thing. Okay, well this is scientific notation. Alright, so it's basically saying that you have this 1 in the 5th decimal place. Okay, so that it's not, and basically that's where it starts listing scientific notation, and it's not so hard to read the zeros when you only have 4 zeros and then a digit at the end, but let's do an example where we've got lots of zeros like this, and that's really hard to count. So let's do a save, and then we'll go back here and then we'll hit refresh. Alright, so then it tells you, okay, well basically the 1 happens to be in the 14th position behind the decimal. Okay, so it tells you that there are 13 zeros. So this is actually a useful thing. But if for some reason you really wanted to print out all those zeros to the screen, then what you would need to do is run a number format on it so that it would actually print out the decimals. And we've already covered that in a different lecture. Let's jump back here. Now, let's get rid of all this haywire stuff. And let's do, well, we can go to null or something like that, but we know that null is even lower than 0 in what we discussed. Alright, so definitely fish is going to evaluate higher than null if it already is evaluating higher than 0. Alright, and there's one more thing I want to bring up about the max function, and that is the issue of what happens whenever there's a nested array. So in this example, I went ahead and I typed in multidimensional here, and you'll see that this is in fact a multidimensional array. So I have an entire array called mixed, and inside of that I have the following values. I have 0, I have John, I have -6.5, I have Andy, and then I have an array, not to mention that I have null and I have 6, but here's an array in this position, and let's see what happens whenever we look at something that has an array in it, or when we count a multidimensional array using the max function. Okay, so let's do a test down here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead here and oops, sorry about that. I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and we're going to paste it here, and we're going to change this value to mixed. Okay, we're going to change this array name to mixed, and let's save that. So we're going to run the max function on this mixed array, which happens to be a multi-dimensional array. Alright, let's go check it in Firefox. Refresh, and you can see here that it returns the value of array as the max value. What does that say about max value? Okay, well let's look at what this is actually saying about it. So the values that it's selecting is it goes from null, which is nothing, absolutely nothing, and then from there it goes to -6.5, which is the next step up, and then 0 is the next step up from that, and then Andy would be the next step up from there, and then John, and then 6 is a whole integer. So you would think that a whole positive integer. you would think that this would be the highest, but in fact it jumps up and it grabs the array and it uses the array as the highest value. So that's just something that you should be aware of, is that if you're running the max function on a multidimensional array, then you kind of have to pay attention to what you're doing. Okay, so that's going to sort of conclude our demonstration about the max function for right now.